Three letters that don't actually make a word could spell trouble for the British government. And those letters are BDS. They stand for Boycott, Divestment and Sanctions, and are meant to put pressure on Israel in the same way as it was applied to South Africa over apartheid. The issue is that the UK government wants to ban certain groups from supporting the movement. This is Roundtable. Hello and welcome to the programme. From me, David Foster. Supporters of BDS believe that pressure on Israel could help to resolve the conflict with Palestinians. The British government was told a year ago that its approach was illegal. Now it's trying again. Tucked away in the Queen of England's annual speech, the UK government has announced legislation that would prevent public institutions from carrying out boycotts and sanctions against countries including Israel, a move seen as targeting the boycott, divestment and sanctions movement. This Palestinian-led initiative involves what it calls withdrawing support from all Israeli and international companies engaged in violations of Palestinian human rights. The planned UK reforms would seek to ensure a coherent approach to foreign relations, as it's put, and prevent public bodies from imposing their own approach or views via boycott, divestment or sanctions campaigns. Downing Street has said it is concerned that such boycotts could legitimize anti-Semitism. The BDS movement says it opposes all forms of racism, including anti-Semitism. Last year, a British court ruled that the government efforts to curb BDS were not legal. So should governments be allowed to prevent public bodies from participating in campaigns such as BDS? I'm very pleased to be able to say that joining us at this round table we have John Cholcroft, Professor of Middle East History and Politics at the London School of Economics. He's in the UK capital, as is Ben Jamal, Director of the Palestine Solidarity Campaign. And then we cross to Jerusalem and welcome Ranbar Yoshafat, attorney and public diplomacy experts. Welcome to this edition of Roundtable. Ran, let me come to you first of all for the sake of geographical preciseness. Are you in East or West Jerusalem?
I don't see a difference between the two, but I'm in West Jerusalem.
You're in West Jerusalem. Okay, thank you very much indeed. Let's talk about apartheid. Do you accept that boycotts and sanctions help to end the regime of apartheid in South Africa?
Yes.
Therefore, if the pressure is maintained, it could help to do the same with some of Israel's policies?
I think that the analogy between Israel and South Africa apartheid is a disgrace not only for Israel, but also to people who actually suffered from apartheid in South Africa. Because in Israel proper, you have members of the parliament who are Arabs, you have high-ranking officers in the IDF who are Arabs, Christians, and Muslims. We had a Supreme Court judge who sent our Jewish president and Jewish prime minister to jail. The analogy is just simply trying to vilify Israel. So I understand the will of those who hate Israel, try to vilify Israel, but I don't agree with the analogy at all.
So do you think that everybody in Israel is treated exactly the same, whether they live, as you do, perhaps in West Jerusalem, whether they are those who are in the settlements on the West Bank, whether they are those people who've been forced to leave their homes? Is there equality for everybody?
Basically, if you're arguing that an Arab in Ramallah does not have the same right as a Jew in Tel Aviv, you're correct. But a Jew in Tel Aviv and an Arab in Tel Aviv do have the same rights. A Jew in Ramallah would not exist because if you sell your house to a Jew under the Palestinian Authority, you will have a capital punishment. If what you want to do is to have the same legal system that we have in Israel, which is equal to all citizens regarding of faith or nationality or whatever, and you want to implement it in Judea and Samaria, you just join the right-wing party that wants to implement Israeli law over Judea and Samaria. That's fine. But if you want the fake nationality of the Arabs in Judea and Samaria to come to be, then obviously Israel cannot implement its law over Judea and Samaria.
Okay, Ben, if you're on the inside looking out, as Ran happens to be from an Israeli perspective, his view's obviously going to be very different to yours. But tell me how you believe the BDS system can change Israel for the better?
David, let's start with the question that you put, which provides the underpinning, in a sense, for the argument for BDS, and this is the argument that says Israel is not what it proclaims itself to be, which is a liberal democracy that is overseeing a temporary military occupation that it would end if only it could find a peaceful partner on the Palestinian side, that it has enacted over many decades a regime of oppression over the Palestinian people that meets the legal definition of apartheid. Rand said that the comparison between Israel and South Africa is one that is insulting also to South Africans. Of course, that analysis is not shared by many of those who were central in the struggle against apartheid in South Africa, notably Desmond Tutu, who says he sees many parallels. But the argument about Israel being an apartheid state is not an argument that says its form of apartheid is exactly like South Africa's. There are many differences. The problem for Israel is that this analysis that has been at the heart of the analysis of Palestinian civil society for decades is now an analysis shared, for example, by Israel's leading human rights organization, B'Tselem. It's an analysis shared by one of the two major human rights organizations.
Can I ask you to go back to the question, Ben, which was how do you believe BDS can change Israel, you believe, for the better?
The argument for BDS flows from the analysis that Israel is an apartheid state. So the task is to end apartheid. And the parallel with, as your other guest has accepted, the parallel with South Africa is the BDS movement was not the sole reason for the ending of apartheid in South Africa, but it was a significant moment. And what we know, what history tells us, and what the narrow history of the last 70 years in relation to Israeli policy tells us, is that Israel is not going to change of its own volition. It is going to require external pressure, and that means being meaningfully held to account. At the moment, there is no cost to Israel for its ongoing occupation, for its ongoing oppression of the Palestinian people.
Ben, for now, thank you. I just want to get everybody in at the start of the programme. So, John, let me come to you. You're making notes, either something's on your mind or you've been listening to what you've been told, and I wonder what your thoughts are so far.
I'm a historian of the history and politics of the Middle East, and I think one of the strongest ways to understand the dynamics of the situation in Israel and Palestine do have to do with an analogy to settler colonialism. And so that does make the comparison with South Africa, the comparison with Northern Ireland, with Rhodesia before 1980, and with the Pied Noir in Algeria of the French before 1962. Those are reasonable analogies. And as Ben points out, external pressure, a movement like Boycott, Divestment, Sanctions, which is rights-based, which is transnational, which is democratic, which is non-violent, which is peaceful, and which takes aim at a structure of racial domination with a very loud and clear declaration as to the importance of basic Palestinian rights.
Sorry to stop your flow there. So why would the British government, which has branded the illegal settlement building in the West Bank as... Well, it says it is illegal. It's backed the international community on this. Why would the British government not want to back BDS to some extent?
It's a very good question because, as you say, in January 2021, the British government issued another statement that settlement activity is illegal under international law. The British government also believes that annexation is illegal and that indefinite occupation is illegal under international law. Those are the stated positions of the British government. So it seems to me that it's not coherent for the British government to now try to shut down these quite precious spaces of democracy on local councils.
But I'm asking for your guess as to why you think they're doing it.
Well, I think it has to do somewhat with the insouciance that the Boris Johnson Conservative administration has displayed towards international law, whether over Brexit, whether over asylum seekers, whether over Israel and Palestine. And I think it's an outdated policy. I think it's also linked to the power of a certain kind of right-wing populism. And I think it's in contradiction with a larger struggle for basic rights.
Okay, so let's go to Ran.
Yeah.
You must be delighted, Ran, with what you think the British government is doing.
I'm not, actually. I think that in this conversation, I see that we have three main things that we disagree on, and I think that they are something that's very important to understand. Number one, Jews are called Jews because we come from Judea. We're not colonialists. This is our homeland. We come from Judea, what you refer to as West Bank. Arabs come from
Can we
Arabia.
not go back over the old arguments? I want to ask you about the British government's decision, if I may. Why are you not
because your
that pleased with
premises,
it?
I'm sorry, it's just that your premises begins with me being on the wrong side of history, and I disagree with that. That's number one. Number two, your second premises is that BDS is non-violent. Now, the KKK can also say that they're against racism and in favor of racial equality, but I would remain skeptical because when I see Ben retweeting videos of Arabs with Hamas's flags, a terrorist organization calling for the murder of Jews wherever they are, on Temple Mount, where Jews and Christians have no right to practice freedom of religion, I'm very skeptical
But
about
you know,
his desire for
this is
peace.
where I did
Unless
not want
we're
the
having
argument
BDS
to
in the
go. I
government.
did not want it to go back over old wounds. I know it's very, very difficult, but let me ask you once again, what do you make of the British government's decision over BDS?
Great. Legislation does not ban or restrict BDS movement, the movement to destroy Israel. It simply says that the government does not want its contractors or businesses partners to be involved in it. If someone is vegan and they don't purchase meat, they're allowed to. If Ben does not want to buy from Israel, he's allowed to. But if you're a contractor of the government, you should not be receiving funds from the government to do this. The European Court of Human Rights, the ECHR, has decided this already time and time again. The most famous verdict is William versus France in 2009. If someone is getting paid from the government has a contract with another country, you cannot undermine the country. As an Israeli, I'm very happy that the UK government understands that the BDS, the movement to destroy Israel, is actually vilifying Jews wherever they are because Jews are being attacked in the UK for affiliation by born Jewish.
Okay, I know you say it is the movement to destroy Israel. You add after that and attack the Jews. We're going to hear now from Lord Eric Pickles, Special Envoy, he's British, for post-Holocaust issues and Conservative Friends of Israel chairman, so there's no doubt where he's coming from. He was a minister in a government, now he's in the upper house, the House of Lords, and he had this to say a bit more than a year ago, but a lot of this has been delayed because of the pandemic. Here we are.
If we've been really honest, BDS is just a thin disguise for anti-Semitism, and we as Conservatives should always tackle racial discrimination, and BDS is one of the worst wink-wink, nod-nod piece of racialism that we know.
So Ben, let me ask you, why do you believe it is not anti-Semitic when it targets the Jewish people?
Well, look, so the BDS movement rests on simple principles that one should not be complicit with any regime of oppression, with any form of institutionalized discrimination, or any form of international law breaking.
But isn't that what this is? It is targeting Jewish people. That is discrimination.
No, it is saying that Israel can only function, can only sustain its regime of oppression if it has the diplomatic, financial, military, cultural support of outsiders. And it is saying that effectively actors have a choice. So governments should hold Israel to account.
But in what way is this not? I'll go back to my original question, and I know it's difficult not to stray off the point in this one, go back to well-rehearsed arguments, but in what way is this not anti-Semitic?
It's the wrong question. Let me put it this way.
It's my question. It is the question out there.
Sure, but most people would regard this as absurd. If I call for sanctions against Russia because of its invasion of and occupation of Crimea, if I call for action in the form of sanctions or any form of boycott against China because of its treatment of the Uyghur people, if I call for action against Saudi Arabia because of its numerous human rights abuses, including its actions towards the people of Yemen, most people would regard it as nonsensical to say that what I'm doing is inherently Russophobic, Sinophobic, or Islamophobic. So the argument that uniquely calling for form of sanctions, boycott, divestment campaigns in response to Israel's serial human rights abuses is uniquely a form of hate speech, is uniquely a form of racism, is a nonsensical argument. So it is not incumbent upon people like me to demonstrate why taking action through BDS, which has a long and noble history as a form of non-violent political protest, is not racist. It's incumbent on somebody else to demonstrate why it is inherently anti-Semitic to call for Israel to be held to account.
I get your point. John, thanks for waiting patiently for this one. What happens, do you think, if the British government gets its way, this law goes through, and it is then illegal for councils and public bodies to take part in the BDS movement?
It would be a form of overweening centralization. It would be a blow against the democratic capacities of local councils to reflect on their procurement decisions and to take decisions that are in line with both moral and legal principles, which is a valuable form of local democracy in Britain. And what's more, it's actually coherent with the British government's position on the illegality of the annexation of East Jerusalem. I mean, we heard from our colleague in Jerusalem that he doesn't see a distinction between West and East Jerusalem, but East Jerusalem was illegally annexed by Israel, and the British government actually regards that as illegal. So, you know, so I think it's a strike against an important form of local democracy, which is not, you know, going back to this issue of the nature of BDS, which operates through persuasion, through democratic activities, through a transnational and grassroots and rights-based form of activism. It's a strike against the possibility that people can persuade councillors, according to their conscience, according to international law, that perhaps they shouldn't procure contracts from systematic human rights abusers or those who aid and abet apartheid and racial domination. So yes, it would be sad, but also I think anachronistic if the British government pursues this line. We should pay attention to the fact that in the last few weeks, there's been a significant voice from civil society, from universities, from campaign groups around issues of apartheid, Palestinian rights, anti-racism, the link with Black Lives Matter. These are all significant developments, and there are reasons to think that this voice has been, you know, somewhat quiet in the public sphere in the last couple of years, but suddenly it's appearing with significant.
Well, perhaps that's because of recent events that we've seen in the Middle East. There's probably no coincidence there. Rand, let me put 2 points to you. One is it is a non-violent movement. It is just coercive, persuasive. And secondly, Ben's point that just imposing sanctions on Russia doesn't mean you're anti-Russian, against China doesn't mean you're anti-Chinese. By imposing sanctions, perhaps, and boycotting Israel, it doesn't mean you're anti-Jewish.
So let's just say that we're on the same page here. In 2015, if I'm not mistaken, the cooperative bank closed PSC's bank account because their funds were funneled into illegal groups in Gaza. I think that the BDS movement is brilliant. Basically, they're trying to vilify Israel. They're trying to vilify Israel.
Ben, you'll have a chance. You'll have a chance.
So that people will be able to think, well, it's okay when Israel is being attacked. So yes, it is non-violent. Only the people who are active in BDS, apparently they are themselves quite violent. And you saw this on the streets of the UK. Regarding is it anti-Jewish or not? So here's the thing. It seems that, again, on their own platform, their website, they say that Israel is committing an ethnic cleansing. Even though the Arabs in Israel proper have grown from 150,000 to more than 2 million and so on and so forth, basically what they're saying is that they want to create a state in Gaza and Judea and Samaria, but send Arabs into Israel proper. So they don't want Jews to have political rights. They don't want Jews to have self-sovereignty, and that is discriminatory.
Well, let's go back to Ben and see what he says about that. I think you'll disagree.
Well, let me just pick up, because look, if we're going to have a discussion, it is important that we all apply ourselves to the facts. And I do have to come back on what Rand said. It's entirely false to say that the co-op bank closed our bank account because of evidence that we were funneling money to organizations in Gaza. We had our bank account closed alongside a whole range of campaigning environmental and other organizations, and the Co-op Bank made it clear that this was on the basis of them shedding accounts.
Okay. You've made your point. Now get back to the discussion.
If RAN has evidence that the Co-op Bank closed on that basis, I'd be very grateful for him to provide it to me, because we would sue them. So that's completely untrue, and I would ask him to stick to the facts.
John, let me come to you. Listening to this argument and going back over the South African issue, the pressure on that regime, the end of a white government in South Africa, going to a much more level playing field, if not a totally level one. Do you think a campaign such as this can work?
Somebody as senior in Israel as Ehud Barak in 2011 spoke about BDS in exactly these terms, that he said it was what they did with South Africa. It would advance like an iceberg from all sides. And it was capable of putting significant pressure on Israel to conform with international law and to dismantle a system of racial domination and oppression. The BDS movement is a long-term process, and just like the anti-apartheid movement in South Africa, so it doesn't happen overnight. But do you remember the petition that just went forward to the British government to impose sanctions on Israel? 384,000 British citizens signed that petition, even in the last couple of weeks. So that's quite a significant shout from civil society.
But my point is going to be that until the United States, in some kind of official capacity, joins the BDS movement, because it supplies so much money to Israel, it's going to be like a gnat on an elephant's backside, this, isn't it? It's really not going to make very much difference. The UK, Israel is 41st biggest trading partner. It's way, way down the list, just around about $5 billion a year. It needs the United States to do something for this to work.
In the case of the anti-apartheid movement, eventually, it was slow, but the United States was brought around. And if you think about the progress of the academic boycotts, very interesting. We always used to say back in the early 2000s, well, the US is never going to have an academic boycott movement because, look at the climate there. But after 2009, it really took off, with US ACB and so on, in ways that we simply couldn't predict, according to a kind of, inert analysis of the lie of the land.
Okay, John, just for now, thank you. We're coming towards the end of the programme. I'm trying to get the other two back in for a final word. Rand, does Israel feel under any pressure because of this?
Honestly, I feel like Israel is basically starting to care less about the criticism. And I'll tell you why. I don't know if you're aware of it, but about a third of the rockets that Hamas fired fell in Gaza, killing Arabs in Gaza. I didn't see the BDS campaign saying anything about free Gaza from Hamas. So it seems like the BDS movement that cares about human rights and they don't really care about protesting Hamas or the PA, which again has a death sentence if you sell your house to a Jew. It doesn't sound very peaceful to me. So when I hear people say that
Ben, let me come to you. It may take many, many years for this to bear any kind of fruit.
Well, I think that's true in terms of significant economic impact. But I go back to what John said. He's absolutely right. If we look at how does Israel regard the threat of BDS, a leading Israeli think tank, the Rayo Institute, produced a report in 2010 that described the growing BDS movement as the major strategic threat to Israel. Benjamin Netanyahu, in addition to the quotation John gave from Ehud Barak, in 2012 made a speech where he described it in exactly those terms. And subsequently, Israel set up an entire strategic ministry whose main function is to try to destabilize the BDS movement globally.
Okay, so final word, Rand. Israel is worried about it because it's trying its very best to reverse it, and it's a little bit scared about what might happen.
What I'm saying is that the Israeli public more and more seems to care less because we feel sometimes that we're going to be vilified no matter what it is that we do, and the other side is being ignored. I've never seen a BDS organization saying, we're going to fight Hamas, which is a terrorist organization. That is not the case. And lastly, I just want to say the fact that people blame Jews by affiliation, meaning if you're a Jew in the UK, you have to be affiliated with Israel, so it's okay to attack you. I never saw anyone from the BDS saying we condemn it, please not attack the Jewish community
Okay,
there. which is
John, final word. We've got about 40 seconds. What will the worldview of Britain be if this legislation is enacted?
Well, I think it would unfortunately reveal the way in which, although the British government says settlements and annexation and indefinite occupation are illegal, it's actually practicing double standards on that by clamping down on local democracy in favor of a sort of short-term set of interstate alliances, and things could change. So I don't think it does Britain any favors on the international stage.
You're very kind, each and every one of you, for taking part in this programme. Very civilised, I have to say. Thank you for your time. Thank you for your patience. And we hope to have you back on Roundtable on another occasion. From London and Jerusalem, we say goodbye to you, and we say goodbye to you wherever you happen to be watching this edition of the programme. We thank you for your time, and we hope to have you with us on another occasion. From me, David Foster, from the Roundtable team, goodbye for now.